And we're here. And I'm sure Hemi's going to fuss because we are going live a little late. Y'all know how we do. Sometimes we just need a little bit of grace.
That's right. Practice that self-compassion. We'll talk about that a little bit.
Listen, so y'all will see me eating here and there. Y'all know how this goes. But without further ado, so first of all, thank you all who have tapped in today. And I want to, so as you can see, Hemi's not here. He's playing hooky today. He's slacking today. But I guess you could also say that he's on his way to a women's lacrosse match, but whatever, he's slacking today. But that's okay because I have a really dope guest today. We have Miriam McConnell, one of our esteemed Cornell College counselors. So I will, whatever. I will continue to, I will give her space to introduce herself. How about that?
Thanks so much, Tia. And I was just telling Tia before we jumped on here, commending her for practicing some good self-care, grabbing some tea and just finding a way to get herself settled and grounded. And so, that's something that we talk a lot about in counseling.
I grabbed tea. I didn't get settled and grounded yet, Miriam.
You're working on it, right? That's one of the things we talk about in counseling. It's a process. I'm super excited to be here. First of all, I'm going to start off by maybe modeling some vulnerability myself and tell you I'm a little bit nervous. I've never done anything like this before, so this is new, a little bit different than Zoom meetings. But super excited, especially to be talking about what we're going to be talking about today. As Tia said, I'm Miriam. You see my name there. A little bit about myself. So I'm pretty new here. I was here last year finishing up an internship. And so this has been my first full year here. So I'm still getting to learn a little bit more about the rhythm here, the happenings here, what the experience is like here. Still relatively new to Iowa, got here just right before the pandemic hit. So learning more about what life is like here. But one of the things, maybe I'll do a little bit of an introduction that I did 2 weeks ago. I'll just kind of throw this out here. A lot of what we'll probably be talking about today is related to a discussion forum that we had about 2 weeks ago, talking about BIPOC mental health and some of the unique experiences and challenges that our BIPOC students and really BIPOC students across our nation are experiencing in spaces in particular like this, predominantly white institutions. And so my own history is I did attend a PWI in the South. I come from a multicultural family, and so my experience has been learning to navigate that space. Over the years, just a number of experiences led me into the field of counseling. As I share openly with my students, that started with being a client myself. And so just found it to be really valuable in helping me understand why I responded the way that I did, and being able to make a little bit more sense of my thoughts and my emotions. And then over the years began to understand how my identity played a big part in those thoughts and emotions and responses, which I did not really initially understand. And so that helped to make things make a lot more sense and enabled me to show a little bit more self-compassion. Again, something that I often touch on with students. That's really important. But yeah, that's a very important piece of it, is being able to understand how our identities are tied to our experiences and our mental health, and to be aware of that, so we can figure out, what might be some tools and maybe some unique tools that we need to use to help us. Ultimately, the ultimate goal is to be able to heal and to thrive. And so that was a very long introduction, but Yeah, again, just excited to be here.
And that's okay. So, and Miriam started with us as an intern during her master's program.
I feel the pain of studying.
And we were fortunate enough to be able to have her then join us full time as a counselor. And so we're all excited. I know so many of our students have been really excited to have Miriam here, especially having a counselor who is a person of color at our predominantly white institution for our students of color. I remember before she even got the job, they were like, she's gone? Where is she? No, we need her. And then when they found out she got the job, we're super stoked that they have someone that they could talk to that looked like them. And could have a different conversation with them that they might have felt was missing. And maybe not a fault of a counselor's part, but I don't feel comfortable sharing these things with someone who doesn't look like me because maybe they may not understand, or I've been in that position before and they didn't understand and I didn't get what I needed. And so I know there are a lot of students who are really, really excited that Miriam is here. And of course, we're excited that Miriam is here. Like we were texting, and I was like, "Okay, did you apply for the job? Okay, did you get the job? All right, where were you?" So
yeah, and I know I'm kind of jumping ahead because support systems is going to be one of the things we talk about, and that's such a critical piece. And I know I've told you in HEME this a number of times, but you all have been an incredible support system, not just for the students. And for each other. I have to say, watching the two of you has been part of my healing through humor.
Okay. I was going to say that's a part of your healing, Miriam. I got questions.
It is. Humor is an important part of healing. But I just really, I enjoy that. And I have appreciated the support as well. And, it's important that we do all support each other. So I want to say thank you, and thank you for that. This year has been an incredible gift. The students are so amazing. And I tell them I learn so much from them every single day, and they amaze me, and they, and you all that are watching are truly resilient. Our hope is just that we can help you realize that, and be able to thrive.
So you've already so the thing that HEME does to me, he doesn't get to do it to me today. And don't you dare type it in the chat either. Miriam, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about BIPOC mental health. Again, just kind of looking at, what are some of the unique challenges and importantly, what are some of the tools that can be helpful in being able to experience mental well-being. We talked about this yesterday in preparing to have, more discussions about how we can support students, but it's very complex. One of the things a lot of times when people are experiencing mental health challenges, they just think, I just got to get it together, or there's something wrong with me, or, I just got to get my thoughts under control. And it may seem like it's a very simple process or a simple answer, but understanding all the factors that go into our mental health is a really important piece of being able to make sense of what's going on and figuring out tools to help with that process. But it is, complex, not to scare anyone, but just to understand that it's just not as simple as, there's something wrong with me and I just got to get things under control. There's a lot more at stake, and we're able to show ourselves self-compassion when we understand what those factors are. So, yeah.
Okay. So thank you. So what are some of the things that you did talk about in this session? I told you you're going to end up doing a lot of the talking because unfortunately I was not there.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to start with, and let me see if I can find a copy here. So I started off at the forum just reading a quick quote. I'll try not to do too much reading today, but I thought this was a really powerful quote. And this quote talks about why it's important to look at our mental health issues through a multicultural lens. And I just thought it captured it really beautiful. And this one actually comes from NAMI, which is a very well-known organization that tries to raise a lot of awareness around mental health. It's called the National Alliance of Mental Illness. And I just want to give a quick shout out. We do actually have a student NAMI group here on campus. So that's one of the resources. We'll be talking a bit about resources, but I want to throw that out there.
We have worked with them definitely in the past. So.
Yes. And so that's important to know that, we do have students themselves that are engaged with this and very passionate about this. But I found this quote on their organizational site that said, "Our culture, beliefs, sexual identity, values, race, and language all affect how we perceive and experience mental health conditions. In fact, cultural differences can influence what treatments, coping mechanisms, and supports work for us. It is therefore essential for culture and identity to be a part of the conversation as we discuss both mental health and mental health care." So just that acknowledgement again, that experiences are going to look different. An important piece of that is, when we think about our identities and the experiences tied to that, it can help us understand our issues better. And also, this really reiterates that one size does not fit all. That does not work in really any setting. It doesn't work in the mental health field, and I just want to acknowledge one of the things that we've recognized in the mental health field is that we have some work to do around cultural competence and recognizing that, when a person is experiencing a certain issue, we can't just look at everybody the same, depending on their background, including their cultural background. While the symptoms may present the same, the source of those symptoms are different. And so we need to look at the source and address that. And the tools that we recommend can also look different if the person comes from a different background, so we can't just throw the same recommendation out for two students that may come from very different cultural backgrounds, and what works for one may not work for another. So I just wanted to kind of start off with that introduction. And another thing that I wanted to really emphasize is that an important piece when we're talking about mental health, when you look at the statistics, the reality is it can look kind of gloomy when you look at the different demographical statistics. And if you just look at the numbers, it can be like, wow, BIPOC communities seem to have worse mental health issues, and we can just reduce it to that. So I think it's important that we're careful not to look at those statistics through a deficit lens and say, well, this just proves a stereotype that BIPOC, communities, BIPOC populations have issues, can't get it together, all those kind of. Instead, look at those numbers through a resilience lens and say, first of all, that the communities have been as strong, as resilient as they are is really incredible. And then look at those numbers and say, what's behind those?
The story.
These are just meant to give us information.
Big on the story behind the numbers. That's why I am not a numbers person. Don't get me started on that. But
no, please.
No, because a lot of people that know, like, don't get like numbers, just stand.
So Tia, you're showing up a little frozen on mine.
So
You were just a little frozen.
Yeah,
I just wanted
we
to.
both froze.
Oh, okay. You know what? Let me plug something in. Hold on just a second. We're just gonna adjust. I am having to work off my laptop, which I don't usually, but that's the only way I can get the camera to work. But let me see. Okay.
Well, and I'm using my laptop too. Okay, so it looks like we're doing a little
Can
better.
you see?
So no, just in the way that numbers are brought about, right? In terms of like p-values are what help determine sometimes some of those statistical significances, but p-values are made up numbers. They don't have a real actual value. So when you are analyzing things when it comes to that kind of stuff, I'm like, yeah, but also, there are variables that can be manipulated, so on and so forth. Like what were the variables that you used? What was the sample size that you used? So on and so forth.
Right.
But the other part of that is, okay, these are the numbers, but what's the story behind the numbers? Because if you don't have the actual story behind the proper story behind the numbers, which is not just like you said, that people of color are not, or just historically marginalized people in general have a higher have higher instances of mental health conditions, and have lower instances of seeking assistance or receiving assistance for that assistance. And it's like, all right, that's what the numbers say, but is that the story we're sticking with? So like you said, the deficit lands, or are we asking why? Are we asking on the number side, all right, what does that mean? What are we doing that's contributing to that? But the why of the story behind the why, because then that dives a lot deeper into the story that a lot of people don't want to hear.
I love that. And you hold on just a sec. My screen switch. Look, so I'm just gonna admit areas of growth right here. I am not necessarily the most technically savvy. So I'm going to try to switch my screen so I can see. Right now I'm looking at a blank screen. So give me just a second. Okay. I'm going to see if I can get this going again. Let's see. Okay.
Are you good now?
There we go. Now I can see you again. I wasn't seeing it and I didn't want to be looking like I was giving you the side eye. That's what I was kind of like. Okay.
All good.
I love all of what you said. And you touched on a key piece that we also talked about, and that's barriers, right? One of the things that we have to look at, gosh, there's just so much, right, to unpack. And I know this is your wheelhouse. You've done so much research around it, but we have to keep history and trauma, and that's something we'll touch on later too. You start talking about historical trauma. When you talk about historically the inequality among resources available, and just so much has led to, for instance, the stigma around mental health, right? And that's a big barrier too in communities of color. Again, one of the things that we wrestle with is not wanting to prove a stereotype. And so if we have to admit that we have, some challenges around mental health, then we're proving we're weak, right? We're having to depend on someone else outside of our community. But the other piece of that too is, again, historically within the health field and mental health field, there's been some trust violated, and there hasn't been a full understanding of our experiences. So there is some distrust, and
I was going to say that it's not even just that; it's the lack of therapists that we have that can relate to us, that can protect us, that understand us. And so I always use the example of, I was fortunate enough. I've seen a couple of therapists, and I'm gonna be honest. I've seen a therapist that looked like me that was terrible, and honestly was psychologically abusive. And I only went to him one time, and I was like, nah, we're not doing that again, because let me tell you, first of all, I've been trained, so I know what you're doing is messed up. The second of all, no, that's not okay. But I was fortunate enough that my last therapist, let me tell you, that woman was dope. She was so dope. And she contributed to so much for me in terms of I've never been in a space where I've been able to tell a therapist, I've been able to say something about racial issues when it comes to my mental health when I'm talking to a therapist. And because sometimes she look at me like, well, yeah, like I'm like, oh, lady, I love you. And this is a white woman. And so, but not only did she help me when I like be able to express things from a racial standpoint, she helped me in my spiritual growth and just so many other things, and reminding me who I am and how that contributes to some of the things that I'm going through, so that I remember. And that is like, that is a, I don't even know how to describe that, because that's beyond the exception versus the rule, where you have a lot of people who, I mean, most of our therapists are not people of color. They're not. We have a very
underrepresented
small percentage. Yes, a very small representation. But then even when you dive into people of color, right, then it's like you have the Latin community sometimes needing a therapist who looks like them. You have the Native community, you have the Asian community in all of the spectrum that is the Asian community, because just in all of the ways that looks, there are a lot of us who deal with people that don't understand our struggles, and understand the other sides of the things that we're dealing with. And so having that representation is key. And when you don't have that representation, you have these people that you trust with your mental health, because this is what their job is. This is what they get paid the big bucks for. But just health wise in general in America, as people of color, we haven't we have been hoodwinked, right? We can get gaslit by therapists.
Yes. Yeah. And we're in a very vulnerable position, and so that can be even more painful and add to the pain. Yeah.
Or as the term goes, race lighting. So don't get me to give in the, I'll look up the definition so I can make sure I'm saying it right. But
while you're doing that, I just want to say thank you so much for being vulnerable about your experiences. I mean, of course, first of all, as a counselor, I'm just like, yay, Tia, for going to counseling, because that does take a lot of courage. Especially in the beginning, you're talking to a stranger. And that whole idea of, and again, within communities of color, this whole idea of going to a stranger, and then if it's a stranger that does not share your background, that can feel especially vulnerable, a bit scary. And there's issues of trust. And know that you do not have to go into the first counseling session and spill your whole life story. I really appreciate you. Gosh, you said a lot of powerful things in sharing that experience. Number one size doesn't fit all. So one of the things that we often tell our students, there's two of us full-time counselors here, and I'll have to share a bit about our other counselor who's really fabulous. One of the things we often tell students is, if the shoe doesn't fit, you don't have to try to make it fit. If one of us does not feel like a good fit, you can try the other one. If neither one of us, you can try someone else. But it's important that you find a counselor that you feel is helpful for you and effective. And what is helpful for one person is not helpful for the next. You are not hurting our feelings, right? So this is your mental health. And so you definitely have autonomy in that, and don't feel badly about that. But you also did something else. You found someone else. That one experience didn't turn you off to all counseling. You still recognized, I have this need, I still need support, so I'm just going to look for it elsewhere. And so, kudos to you for doing that. I myself have done that as well. And that is a really important piece. And again, I'll talk a little bit about resources later for finding a culturally competent, and they can look different. Again, the reality is the mental health field is not very diverse. We are growing in that. We still have a long ways to go. And so you may not find someone necessarily that shares the same cultural background, but you can still look for one who at least is culturally humble and at least tries to understand and has done some training and research around that. So
and somebody that's willing to meet you where you are. And
yes.
So the thing that and to highlight that too, we are speaking from very privileged spaces.
Yes, thank you for acknowledging that.
In that we can afford to look and shift and find those things out. When we're talking overall, I'm not gonna lie, I hate the term BIPOC, but when we're talking BIPOC or just historically marginalized identities in general, when we're talking about our mental health and things like that, and mental health conditions, mental health assistance, all of those things, not everybody has access to those.
Yes.
I will say the one thing I learned, I'm so glad, and I only learned this recently. And when I say recently, it's with the counselor the therapist that I previously had, is that a lot of the mental health professionals that we run into are based out of a practice of some sort, and that gets expensive. And the organization that you're with, if you have healthcare that's the other part of it, right? Do we have healthcare that covers mental health assistance? Because not all healthcare covers it the same way, and not every healthcare professional takes the same insurance, all those things. Right. But if you have access to a clinical counseling service, meaning it is tied to a hospital of some sort, then if you have the health insurance that covers it, you only have to pay your regular copay. And that is actually the way that I was able to even work with my therapist, because I didn't have no money. And even still, and so I was able to work with them because it was clinical. It was tied to a hospital. And so it's my regular $20 copay, not $140 every session and those types of things.
Yeah. Thank you so much for acknowledging that. And actually that also touches on resources, right? Finding how you can get in. Well, number one, that addresses another barrier, the cost. It can be very cost prohibitive. And that's been another reason why, historically, there haven't been as many BIPOC individuals in mental health, seeking mental health support as well. So being aware of resources that are available is really key, seeing what is covered under insurance. I'll use this opportunity to put this plug in. All the services here at the Counseling Center are free, and they are unlimited. That was a recent change. So in years past, just because of staff shortages, we had to limit the sessions. As we're expanding, we've shifted that. And so again, meeting students where they are. For some students, for a time period, they may need to meet weekly. Others just want to check in once a block or once every couple of blocks. So it looks different for every person. But here, we don't have to worry about the insurance. So, please take advantage of that.
Oh, yeah. So we do have more than students on here as well. So we got community members, alumni, peoples.
Great. I love it. I love all the support out there. So
yeah. So absolutely. Okay. So race lighting.
Yes. Enlighten us.
Race lighting, which is a term that was developed, I do believe, by Dr. J. Luke Wood, is the process whereby people of color question their own thoughts and actions due to systematically delivered racialized messages that make them second guess their own lived experiences and realities with racism.
Yeah. And that goes to one of the unique experiences, that people of color have on top of, just everyday life stressors. And so that was one of the things we talked about at the forum too. on top of all the stressors that affect everybody from all walks of life, what are some of the unique ones? So that would be one of them. One of the ones that we keyed in on was discrimination, right? And what does that look like for students of color? This part of the conversation. One of the things that I really appreciated, I have to put this plug out for the students, is they were really engaged in the conversation. And this one definitely kind of hit a nerve. I think we could have talked for hours about the different experiences around discrimination, whatever that looks like, implicit bias, microaggressions. That's a huge one that we see. Macroaggressions. Again, we mentioned the stereotyping and the effect of that. Not only does it have just an effect in the moment that can stay, so that can stay with the students when they've just had an experience. And sometimes in the moment, they may not even be aware that it was a microaggression, just something in their body and their mind registered that this is an unsafe environment, right? Some comment made related to their cultural background. Or not even overtly, but just something subtle, or being around someone you can tell is not comfortable because you're different. Those kind of experiences on a daily basis, they not only have an effect, just in that moment, but then suddenly, like, the student has a hard time focusing on their schoolwork, or again, being the only one in a class, they begin to question their ability or their sense of belonging, and on top of all the other stressors, that's a layer that is constantly there. So one of the things that I'm going to grab this here so I don't misread any of it, but one of the studies that I touched on a bit to talk about where some of the difference are between, like, our BIPOC students and their white peers came out of a study that was conducted by someone named Volpe. And the name of the study was What We Know About the Mental Health of Students of Color in College. So this specifically focused on the group that we work with. So one of the things they found was, the study was conducted in 2016. They found that the students of color in this particular study reported feeling overwhelmed all or most of the time compared to their white peers for their first term. For Cornell, that probably equates to like the first 3 or 4 blocks. We're on a little bit different system. And again, like, all this is meant to normalize, for our students of color who are like, why do I, if they're looking around thinking, why do I feel like I'm a little bit more stressed out and overwhelmed than my white peers? Know that you're not alone, and that was one of the biggest messages just throughout the night as we were talking, was just the sense of students were feeling like, oh, I'm not alone in this. This is something that across the board, so many of us are experiencing. So another finding from the study was that students of color were less likely than their white peers to ever either seek mental health support or remain. And that's actually across the board, just in other research that I've delved into while I was in school. The return rate to mental health treatment historically has always been lower in communities of color. So again, this is just a challenge across the board. The students of color in the study were found to experience compound stress in college. Again, just that acknowledgement of added stressors, always having that layers of stress, a lot of time, again, related to like discrimination, but others as well. And this was a key piece too, intersectionality, right? And I know we could talk for days about that one. But what they found was that low-income first-gen students of color were the most vulnerable. So they experienced the most mental health challenges. And again, not a reflection at all on weakness, just that acknowledgement that there are those extra
Well, because there's a lot of cultural dissonance. There is a lot of imposter syndrome. There's you're in an environment like there. So there are things on top of things on top of things.
Right.
So, I mean, because it's one of the things I was thinking about earlier when we're talking about mental health support or not having the access to that. And I know, like, I watch a lot of scary movies because I like to. But the cool thing, I mean, not the cool thing, but the interesting thing about it is, which it's not necessarily falsifying these things, but a lot of people who might not have had much money when it comes to mental health support, like not having that mental health support, and now they're crazy, and now they're being put in a psychiatric home, which we know that these places were not safe places for anybody. Right. At all, you know, and it wasn't necessarily just people of color, because when we talk about, and we're talking about historically, it's full of white people, because people of color were, you know, we were elsewhere doing other things or having other things done to us. And so we're talking low income people in general, or people who not all of them were low income, but many of them were, because you don't have anybody to support you, fight for you, speak for you, in, you know, and all those things, and keep you safe from being put in those spaces. Or people were just putting people in those spaces. Right. So the point of that is not having that support in general, not having access to a lot of these things in general as a low income person. Then you're talking about being a person of color, and also being in a family or being in a space where you see a lot of older people who have mental health conditions, that, because we don't talk about it. So we don't talk about Uncle so-and-so who has schizophrenia, and, you know, we're just like, oh, he crazy. You know, that's the way that's been brought to us. Or, you know, whoever's on the corner talking to themselves, walking down the street, us not knowing like the issues with that. We know something's wrong, but it's more of something's wrong, right? And so being low income, coming from those families where we're seeing those neighborhoods where we're seeing a lot of these things, and then going to college, where already the message is that, like, socially, the message is that college is not for me. As right. a person of color, college is not for me, and I'm going to a predominantly white college, so I'm out of the space now. So just all the layers, right? Right. Completely understood.
Right. And that really is the bottom line, is when we're able to acknowledge, to understand all the layers that a person has on top of just the everyday stressors, you know, it's no wonder. I mean, you're gonna be more stressed because you're having to deal with all these extra stressors that the next person is not having to deal with. And a good part of that are stressors outside of your control, you know, systemic issues that are affecting a person. And so a really important piece of mental health and in the healing process is being able to externalize, instead of saying, oh, this is just about my inability to deal with all these stressors, of being able to acknowledge, like, well, there were things that I'm affected by that are outside of my control. You know, there are things that I can control and I can put in place to start taking care of myself. But still, I mean, I still have to deal with things constantly. And I don't need to accept responsibility for that, you know, and oftentimes, you know, it isn't important, you know, hear me, I'm not saying that we can't accept responsibility. That's a part of mental health. But sometimes we accept responsibility for things that we shouldn't. And then that leads to feelings of shame.
Right.
Right. And so that's why it's just really important to acknowledge what those extra, and I know maybe this is a good time to get into a little bit of what you and I were chatting about yesterday with systems, and, you know, understanding how, you know, we're all affected by all these systems around us, and then, you know, how we respond to those ends up affecting those systems. So it's, you know, it's a reciprocal process there. But when we can understand ourselves and see ourselves within those systems, then we understand again, wow, there's a lot of things that are affecting me here. It's not just, again, I'm having these bad thoughts, that I can't get under control. So, yeah, I don't want to put you in the spot. I know this is kind of your wheelhouse. But some people might be kind of familiar with the ecological model. That's
I can never pronounce his name correctly. Bronfenbrenner.
Bronfenbrenner. Yes. Yeah, you got it.
Sorry, Bronfenbrenner.
That's a tough one.
Not me because I didn't say your name right. But in short, Bronfenbrenner's system really just says you have, when we're talking about identity development, I'm not going to break all the systems down, but there are these various layers going from the self to the immediate environment, family, outside of the immediate environment, so schools, those things, all the way out to the whole chronos system, time, right? So you got self and family and those systems around there. You've got society, and then you've got time on the outer part of that, and time, history, all those types of things. So yeah, we're gonna keep it short.
Yeah, I know, right? Again, another thing we could talk for, hours and days about. But yeah, the key piece again is understanding like all the different systems and how they affect us, so that when we're experiencing issue, when we see the bigger picture, it's like, okay, now I understand what all is going on. And some of it is, even though it's beyond me and in my immediate experience, it's still affecting me. And that can be really helpful to understand. And this is kind of a good transition into what I was going to talk about, tools. Like, what are some of the things that we can do to begin to heal and to thrive. And there were just 5 things that I touched on. And so this systems model was one of the things that we just briefly touched on. But we talked about, spending some time reflecting, like, again, thinking about the systems that we're a part of was a piece of that. Spending some time reflecting, practicing self-care, seeking help, using support networks, and engaging. Those were kind of the 5 broad things that we talked about during the forum. And those were just ones based on things that I've researched, information out there. But there's different models out there, and one of the models, I'm just going to quickly, before we hop off, I'll try to remember to mention, is one that I want to expand on. There's a new model, a fairly new model that's been proposed, especially in working with clients of color, that can be kind of helpful. But yeah, like I said, this was one that I just kind of put together based on different approaches. But the reflection piece, starting off with reflecting, taking some time to think about our identities. And there's I'm trying to see if I have a copy here. I don't know.
Is it okay to share? I was going to share a picture of that model that we were talking about yesterday.
Please do. Yeah, I only have a scribble, one that has a bunch of scribble on it, but that would be really helpful.
It's to do all kind of madness right now. Here we go. I haven't shared a screen in a minute. So can you see that?
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Okay. So this is essentially Bronfenbrenner's model, but we're talking about, now this one is racial and ethnic identity attachment, but this is what we're talking about when we're talking about that model and BIPOC mental health, or even just individuals in the way that we are impacted by a lot of different things. So y'all can see a better explanation of Bronfenbrenner's system than
for those of us that are visual learners, right? That's important. Like a part of that middle part there. This is what we're talking about, reflecting on understanding who we are. So we're starting off, in that middle part, understanding a little bit more about our identities. And I'm just going to kind of throw this up here. There's like an identity wheel that has like 11 different major sociocultural identities. So spending some time reflecting on what our different identities are, and then intersectionality, looking at within our identities, what identities have been historically marginalized, and then recognizing like, wow, how much the more intersectionality you have, again, from outside sources, they're going to be more stressors, right? And just, again, that recognition.
Don't y'all talk about my 50 million tabs open either. I just showed all my business.
Mine is 100 million. So
I showed my slip. I showed all my business. My bad. But just so y'all
trust me when I say no judgment on that. But yeah, spending some time, thinking about personalities, even just within that center circle ourselves. There's so many complexities, different identities, different personality, different experiences. So the way that we interpret experiences is going to look different, right? So thinking about that, thinking about historical trauma. We're not just affected by our own experiences. We also carry with us that trauma that's been passed on through our families and through the different social cultural groups that we belong to, right?
And supposedly as well, that trauma is also embedded in your DNA.
Yes.
So just think about, how that impacts so much, just all the things.
Yes. And thank you for bringing it up. That is important. They're doing more and more research around that. Again, even just the sense that even at birth, there is an added stressor, and then experiences add, to that.
Right. So understanding that even with some of the trauma that, that surrounds us, some of our trauma that our bodies receive, we didn't even have a choice in the matter. It's already there.
Right. Yeah. And that can help us to externalize some of that. But as we spend the time thinking about our identities, spending some time thinking about our experiences tied to that, what messages did those experiences send to us, and how much did we internalize? So we talked about this whole, one of the big things we talk about in mental health are core beliefs. What have we ultimately come to believe about ourselves, about the way that we look, the way that we act, which affects our if we see ourselves in a healthy way, it affects our self-esteem. And when you spend some time looking at your identities and thinking about the experiences, and then thinking about what those experiences, the messages they sent you, then you might be able to say like, oh, I don't like the way I'll use curly hair. Again, I'll practice some vulnerability. For the longest time, I didn't like my curly hair. And when I began to peel back the onion, it was like, oh, it's because of some negative stereotypes attached to that. And so part of my own self-acceptance was saying, curly hair is beautiful. This is who I am, right? But it took some peeling back. And for me, that was tied to identity, that helped with the self-acceptance. And then personality, I'm going to talk a little bit about like resources around that too. But practicing self-care, that's a huge piece. And you touched on something like taking a holistic approach is really important in that. Our mental health is not, again, just about our ability to control our thoughts. Sometimes there are a number of other factors. We are not just our thoughts, our bodies, what's going on in our bodies affects us. Again, what's going on externally. So I showed this wellness wheel, and I think there was like 8 different categories and it's all connected. If you're experiencing financial stress and you don't have financial stability, that's going to affect your mental health. If physically you have health issues, that's going to affect your mental health. So we need to pay attention to all those different factors. It's not going to be perfectly balanced. Okay. We got to take some of that pressure off, but thinking about what might be some other factors that we may need to pay attention to that are affecting our mental health.
And I want to highlight too, that a lot of people forget too, that our mental health also impacts our physical health.
Yes, it does.
If you already have a physical health condition, not being able to manage your or not managing your mental health is also going to further impact that, but can also cause other health conditions or physical health conditions. So
thank you so much for highlighting that. Yeah, that is important. Those two can be tied together, healing on both fronts, health, physical health and mental health.
it's just a sucky circle. So it's just like
it is. I mean, and even in that, we have to be careful not to be overwhelmed. Like, oh gosh, I gotta, no, the point of that is not like, oh no, I'm even more stressed because I got to look at all these different areas. It's just again, just take an awareness approach. Okay, I'm aware now, right? So these are tools.
Well, and I said it was a sucky circle. I didn't mean that. It's a circle because if you are doing better in either of those, right, that can positively impact the other as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Self-compassion, that's a huge one I touch on all the time. That is a significant part of self-care. We are so hard on ourselves, and again, a healthy, it's very healthy to accept responsibility. However, a lot of times we think we're accepting responsibility, but really we're doing things out of shame. And we have a difficult time showing ourselves compassion. Sometimes we can show other people compassion much easier than we can ourselves, but this is really important for us to be able to do. Seeking help, right? We've talked at length about that. And so I just provided the students with just some examples of organizations where you can actually do a search for a culturally competent counselor. Know that there are resources out there for that. Some are very specific. I mean, there are ones for each major racial demographic group in the US, some, for specific sexual identities, so you can find resources out there to find therapists that have more experience with different identities. Using a support network, really important, finding social support groups who celebrate differences, who celebrate cultural backgrounds, whether that looks like more of a cultural specific groups. We've got some on campus, and that's been a real source of strength. But we are not meant to do this alone. One of the things I commonly hear is I don't want to burden anyone else, but we have to carry this together, right? We can't do it alone. And there's a lot of power in being able to share our stories with other people, and finding ways to support each other, to check in on each other. We got to check in on each other. How are you? I mean, you and Hemi do that with, how are you doing, girl? We've got to do that and see how we're doing. And if, you see that someone's not in a good place, you don't have to be their counselor. Okay. I'll make that distinction, right? Support can just be listening for a little bit and providing a resource. That's how simple it can look.
And me and Hemi's favorite question is, how can I best support you? Right? I'm not asking you, you don't even have to give me the whole story. You don't have to give me any of the story. How can I best support you in this moment?
Right.
Because then I'm not being your counselor. Then I am not taking on the weight of whatever is going on, because I may not be able to do that because I got my own things and my own weight, but I'm still asking how I can best support you. Providing support is not necessarily taking on the weight of what's going on, right? It's still being there for them.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And just acknowledging, like, that can be uncomfortable, and being willing to be a little bit uncomfortable. But again, you don't have to carry the weight of that. There are resources, and just being aware of those resources. And I'll mention some real quick. I know we're getting short on time.
Yeah, we are essentially at time, but we're gonna.
Okay. Good. So I'm going to throw this one out really quick. The last one, I know I mentioned engage, and that's, being active and advocating and gaining that sense of empowerment. But there's a number of resources, and I'm going to send those your way too, Hemi and Tia, so that way folks have those available. But the one that I really want to mention, especially for our students of color, is the Steve Fund. They have a ton of, that organization was specifically founded to focus on the mental health of young adults, so college students and high school students. And so they've done research, they have a number of webinars, stories available, social media, right? Look, we live in social media world. Tap into those, put those in your feed, those kind of organizations. JED is another one that's for college students. And then the last one, I have to do this as a counselor. We got to talk about suicide prevention because that's a big one. So the 988 number, I think more and more people are becoming familiar with it. That's the new number used by crisis prevention. That's crisis and suicide. So please keep that in mind. It's a 24/7 crisis line. But there's also one specifically for students of color, young adults of color, that the Steve Fund has. If you text Steve to 741-741, those counselors are specifically trained to help students of color navigate times of crisis. And if they're having any suicidal ideation, it may not necessarily be ideation, but
That's really
for sure, reach out. So
that's really good.
But thanks again. I know I was kind of going fast there, but obviously we can talk about this for a long time. So
well, and it's on YouTube Live, so people can play it back if they need to. They can slow it down. They can do whatever they need to do to receive everything that all of the wonderful gems that you have given us today. So we will definitely be having you on again, Miriam. You don't get to skate it.
I'm looking forward. This was fun. This was fun.
It's like you get comfortable after a minute and you're like,
right?
You're here.
It's just a conversation, but a super important conversation. But thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you for giving, for sharing your presence with us today.
Yeah.
Well, and all the days.
It was a gift. It was good. This is great for my mental health. So.
and mine. It gave me a moment to take my mind off of all the things and to like slow down. And I finally got settled and grounded.
Good. So, next time we'll talk about deep breathing. We'll do some deep breathing exercises.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my team worked and now I got to feed my face. I'm starving. But
do that self-care.
Yeah. So some more self-care. Thank you so much, Miriam, for joining us today and for sharing these gems with us. And we'll definitely, like I said, this will not be the last time that we will have you join us, and maybe our slacker will be with us next time. You know, I can't say nothing because I wasn't here last week, even though I was on vacation. Call it what you want. But I wasn't here last week, so I'm not going to give him mess because he did this by himself last time and rocked it. So safe travels, Hemi. Great win to you and the ladies. And by ladies, I mean our wonderful coach as well. So great day to everybody. And
go Rams.
Yeah, we'll see y'all next Thursday.
All right. Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody.